Hey, Teddy K here for Best Buy Plugin, and in this video review we take a look at the Canon EOS R. This is a full-frame mirrorless camera that mostly sticks to Canon's heritage and gives you plenty to shoot with a few caveats. Canon's gone mirrorless before, but in the EOS R they've gone full frame for the first time, so this is a debut, and I got some mixed feelings about it. For the most part, I really like the camera, but there were a couple things that irked me as well. Now, if I had 20 to 30 minutes, I could go on and on about the camera, but I don't, so I'm going to try and break it down to the very basic things and highlight some of the great things about it and also some of the things that I wish they could have changed. Just a couple things to point out about the body. If you were hoping going mirrorless that Canon would have shed a lot of weight and girth, well, not so much. This is very much, it feels like a DSLR, and that's probably not necessarily a bad thing. It's probably a good thing if you're coming from that world. I would say that the camera it resembles the most is probably the 5D Mark IV inside and out, because they actually use a very similar image sensor as well. And whether or not the output in terms of the performance that you get, that also depends on the lens, which I'll get to in a second. So generally, if you're coming from the Canon world, then you'll get acclimated very quickly, because the button layout, even the menu system, a lot of that is just carried over from DSLR. So there's not much that's changed as far as getting around and controlling what it is you want to do. Now the lens mount is different. So Canon now has an RF mount for the EOS R. That is different from the EF mount. So if you want to use old EF lenses, you'll have to get an adapter to do that. If you do, bear in mind that you have a lot of lenses that you can use in that case, but, and this is a very big but to me, there's no image stabilization in the body. So if you're using a lens that has no IS, and then of course there's none in the EOS R itself, well, you just have no image stabilization at all. This is interesting because of the 4 lenses that Canon has released for the EOS R so far, I only tried the 24-105 f4, so there are 2 in particular that don't have IS. So the 50mm fixed focus, f1.4, that one does have IS. The other 2 that are in the lineup so far do not. It's interesting, but it is what it is. Only 1 memory card slot. It's SD cards, by the way, so that might not be something you like too much. I don't know. The LCD screen in the back does flip 180 degrees, which is very good for selfies. So if you're using a gimbal as well, you'll be able to see yourself at the same time. That's something that I kind of wish Nikon and Sony would do more of. Also, you will have to get used to the menu system. Now, this is if you're assuming you're not used to what Canon does. In terms of changing the modes, now there is a small LCD at the top that you can see what you're switching to, and then of course basic things like shutter speed, aperture, that so on. But I kind of wish that they would just go with like a physical dial that would just show me what mode I'm on, but that's just, for the most part, the quality of the images I shot were great. I mean, whether it was low light or whether it was in bright settings, I had no major problems shooting. The ISO was not as sensitive as I thought it would be, so I was shooting up to 1600 or 2400, and the noise really only started to kick in probably above 2400, depending on how dark it was. Like if it was really dark, maybe at 16 you might see a little bit, but not that much. So you could go pretty high in the ISO here and really avoid some of that grain and get some very good shots without having to just drop down that shutter speed way too much. So for the most part, you have some versatility in how you're shooting depending on what it is you're shooting, and I'm all for experimentation when you're using a camera. This is important also if you're coming from a world where maybe you had an entry-level DSLR, you're kind of learning the ropes. The EOS R would be a pretty big upgrade that way, because there's just a lot that you can do, but it also does matter what lenses you're using too. The 24-105 that I used was not bad. It was a pretty good lens. For a kit lens, actually, it was very nice, but considering the glass that Canon has, the EOS R is capable of shooting way better than that. Unfortunately, I can't really say the same for video. So shooting in 4K has a 1.7 time crop factor, which is, I think, a little high. It really narrows the angle in terms of what you're shooting, so that's gonna be a bit of a problem if you want to shoot video a lot. Moreover, I just can't understand why slow motion video is limited to 720p. I mean, it really should be 1080 for a camera of this caliber. Same thing with 4K. You're stuck at 30 frames per second, and with 1080p, you can only do 60 frames. So you're limited in the settings as far as video goes. So it's interesting because the sensor is capable of shooting really good video. Unfortunately, it's constrained by the limits of what you can actually choose to do. And so for video, I can't recommend the EOS R. I think compared to what competitors have out there and some of the versatility that they offer, I just don't think the EOS R should be considered primarily for video. If it's a secondary feature, you're going to use it once in a while, fine. But if video is going to be something you're going to do a lot of, I just don't think this camera is good enough for that. I'm going to make a quick point about battery life. So battery life is rated about 370 shots, somewhere in that range. So you'll easily crack that if you're not using the EVF too much, or if you're not using the touchscreen too much. It really depends what you're doing. If you're relying a lot on the touchscreen, then you may crack 300. So think of the 370s kind of as an average. If you find that a bit too low, you can definitely get another battery, but bear in mind also that the type of battery the EOS R uses is the same as some of the batteries that Canon DSLRs use. So if you already have one, you can probably use that battery in the EOS R as well. So as I sum everything up, I just want to point out here and sort of emphasize, I think, that this is, for the price and the caliber of camera that you're getting here, this is a big step. If you're going from like a Rebel, a Canon Rebel, for example, an entry-level DSLR, and you're going to this, that's a big jump. And so I would caution that you make this move because this is Canon's first attempt at a full-frame mirrorless camera. It is a very good camera, but I feel like they could have done better. And so you need to be really serious about your photography if you're going to take this plunge, or you're already in Canon's ecosystem and you're looking to go mirrorless. Otherwise, if you're just starting fresh, I would consider other options before you take the plunge on this one. And that's my review of the Canon EOS R for Best Buy plugin. I'm Teddy K. Thanks for watching.